father, "Might you please move your foot back under the table? I would not want to trip and spill this hot coffee all over you by accident." Then I took an unusually large step over his outstretched leg and went on around and filled his father's cup. Mrs. Edwards covered her mouth to hide a smile. Mr. and Mrs. Richards' mouths dropped open. Mr. Edwards' eyes had a twinkle in them by the time I filled his cup. Then with my head high, I returned to my place at the sideboard. Mr. Edwards finally broke the silence. "John, do you remember when we were children growing up in Central? Remember how we used to walk by the mine captain's house on our way to play in the woods? Do you remember what you always said?" "Goodness, no, that was ages ago." "Well, I'll remind you. You always said, 'Someday I'm going to have a house like that with lace in the windows and my wife won't have to scrub floors.' That is what our parents wanted for us. Is what you want for your children any different than what those Finns, as you call them, want for their wives and children? Do you know what my biggest problem with the strike is?" "I can't imagine," Mr. Richards said. "My problem is figuring out a way to keep Emma working for me when it finally ends, and then later how to let her go when something better for her comes along, and it will come along. This young lady has more brains than a few others in this room. She can speak in Finnish to some of my customers and perfect English to me in the next sentence. Then she tells the customer an estimate of the total for her groceries. When I add it up, she's right almost to the penny. We must all, every single one of us, never forget our humble beginnings." It fell silent again. Finally, Mr. Richards cleared his throat and said, "Chester, you and I have never felt the same politically, so let's leave it at that. Delicious cake, Jessie." He put another forkful in his mouth. "I'll never have to think about daisies again. I'll just remember what Mr. Edwards said about me tonight." Thursday, February 26th. Mrs. Edwards sent me out to do errands this afternoon just in time for me to get over to the train station to watch Big Annie leave on a lecture tour. She would go all over the country and talk to people, asking them to give money to support the strike. The ladies gave her a fancy feathered hat. She told everybody, of course we would rather die than give up. She smiled, but there was a look about her that gave me the feeling it was not a real smile. Later, when I came out of the post office, I saw Marie on her way home from school. I called out to her. It has been so long. She came running up to me and we hugged each other. I told her how I have been doing and asked how school was going for her. "It goes all right, but I wish you helped me with English," she said. "Does your father say we still cannot see each other?" "He hasn't said much since Christmas Eve, and, well, you know," she said almost in a whisper. "Do you think it would be a good idea to ask him if we could meet so I could help you with your schoolwork?" "I don't know. Maybe if I try Saturday after he goes to confession. He might be more likely to say it is all right then. Do you still go to the library?" "Sometimes. I'll ask if I can go next Friday afternoon," I said. "Well, I'll ask my father this Saturday. Then I'll tell you next Friday what he says." We went our separate ways. I'm going to pray very hard in church this Sunday. But now I had better study for my history test. I want to bring up my grades. Sunday, March 1st. Why is it that every time I begin to feel hopeful, things go badly again? Sheriff Cruz announced in the newspaper yesterday that John Hutta, a Finnish miner in Painesdale and the corresponding secretary for the South Range local WFM, confessed to the murder of the 2 Cornish miners last December. The paper said he had been drinking a lot lately and feeling bad. He handed a bullet shell to a deputy and told him, "I got the souvenir for you. It is the one I took with me on the night we did the Painesdale job," the paper said. So, all the talk is against us again. I'm very sad that it turned out to be one of us. Papa was quiet at Sunday dinner, but he did say this, "At least he got it out, took the blame for what he done. Waddies at Seaberville never done that." Mama nodded her head. Matti cheered us all up by saying that he mastered shoeing horses and is learning to mend tools now. Early in January, he had told Papa he wanted to switch from academic classes at the high school to the trade center. He said if he is a skilled blacksmith, when we have our farm, we won't have to pay someone else for those services. Now he says he can even do them for other farmers near us and maybe earn a little extra. Friday, March 6th. I made it to the library right about the time school would be letting out. I settled down with several newspapers to wait for Marie. This is the last week for the congressional hearings. The WFM gave testimony for the first 3 weeks. This week it has been C&H's turn. The company even took the representatives on an underground tour. McNaughton did a good job convincing them that the workers here have it good compared to places like Pennsylvania. It doesn't look like they will be able to end the strike by saying that C&H broke any labor laws. It surprised me to read that the company did admit some captains and managers are unfair. When Marie came into the reading room, she had a smile on her face. Papa said we might as well be friends out in the open since nothing he did stopped us anyway. We worked on her English homework for a while, and then I had to leave. Mrs. Edwards always expects me to return from my errand trips by 4:30 p.m. so I can help Maud begin supper. I'm going to ask Mrs. Edwards if it is all right for Marie to come by after supper the nights I do not have classes. Maybe she will let us work in the kitchen as long as I finish the supper dishes. Wednesday, March 11th. Mrs. Edwards said Marie may come to the back door and we may work in the kitchen. I have classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so she will come Monday and tonight. While I wash and dry the supper dishes, she reads her English homework aloud, and I tell her what to correct. I've also been helping her learn new words. We are starting with everything in the kitchen. I make her practice saying sentences with the names of things and how they are used. After an hour or so, Marie goes home, and I go to my attic room to study my homework. I hope I have pulled my grades back up to B's. If I work harder, I still have time to make A's by the end of the school year. Things are pretty quiet with the strike. The Congressional Committee went to Chicago to get Mr. Moyer's testimony. He said the men can end the strike any time they want by having a referendum. It seems the union has given up trying to win. The company has already given men still working a small pay increase and a shorter day. The men get 50 cents more a day, but they work 5.5 fewer hours each week. So they don't end up making much more than they did before the strike started. I understood from what Mr. Moyer said that the goal now is only to make sure our men can return to work without being punished. Sunday, March 15th. Pop and Yago are quiet about the strike these days. I guess they still go to the meetings. Some of the men still say they fight it out forever, but mostly they want to go back to work. Nobody says so out loud, but they are worried about the backlash that might happen when they do return. Papa always asks how school is going for me. You keep study, he always says. That's the only way you get ahead. Sometimes he asks me if he says things right, but it seems disrespectful to correct him. For the first time in months, the strike is not on the front page of the newspapers. That is fine with me. I've only been reading the headlines anyway. I need more time to study. Sunday, March 28th. Sunshine streaming in the window makes me wake up now. The streets are full of mud and slush. Every morning the puddles are frozen, but by noon water runs along the edges of the streets in little rivers. The snow has melted from around the sides of Mr. Edwards' house. Little green spikes are poking up through the wet, black dirt. Maud says they are crocuses and tulips. Spring flowers. I like the thought of that.